My name is Mark Chorney. I'm a partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. For those of you who weren't in here a little earlier, I focus on partnership building and outreach in Clatsop and Columbia counties, as well as Hood River, Wasco, Sherman, Gillum, and Morrow counties. And then I'm also the lead on connecting with organizations, nonprofits, professional associations, you name it, regarding awareness around the importance of counting children under 5 and their families and people experiencing homelessness, which is what we will be discussing today. Group quarters enumeration and service-based enumeration, excuse me. So similar to last time and some of the other breakout sessions, go over this and then we'll do some question and answer and go from there. So let us begin. Title slide. Okay. Where's my card? There it is. Okay. So, what is a group quarters in terms of the Census Bureau? As you can see here, it is a place where people live or stay who are usually not related to each other, but stay in a group living arrangement owned or managed by an entity or organization providing housing or services to that group. So when we talk about group quarters in the census, we're talking about group homes, we're talking about nursing facilities and nursing homes, residential treatment centers, college and university housing, as well as seminary housing, religious group living quarters, correctional facilities, inpatient hospice facilities, hospitals, workers group living quarters, and job corps centers or vocational training centers. These are all of our group quarters that fall into group quarters enumeration. On top of that, included in our group quarters universe are service-based locations. So as you can see here, that includes shelters, soup kitchens, regularly scheduled mobile food vans, and excuse me, what we call TINSELs, or targeted non-shelter outdoor locations. Those types of locations, you would think about people living unsheltered outdoors, tent encampments, on the sidewalk, in a doorway perhaps, and underneath a bridge or overpass. Essentially, folks living outdoors in a forest, that sort of thing, in those types of areas. And I want to go a little further into our kind of definition of that and say that in terms of service-based enumeration, which we also call SBE, so the goal there is to count people who do not have a usual residence and are likely to be missed during our enumeration at housing units and many types of group quarters, and kind of got into this a little bit in the last session I was talking about. So that certainly includes people experiencing homelessness, and this is our method of enumerating that population. But unlike the point in time count, for example, results from this operation, from service-based enumeration, don't truly provide a count of the population experiencing homelessness. And this goes off to your question too, Vivian, and we were kind of talking about this at the end of the last session when I came in. So a couple reasons here, but this decennial census form just does not include questions that would capture that information about people experiencing homelessness, unlike point in time, which does. So it just remains important, of course, to include people experiencing homelessness in the census, as the data we collect are crucial to fair representation, the distribution of billions of dollars worth of federal funding every year, and the simple fact that everybody counts in the 2020 census. So some things to keep in mind as we're talking about this. So let's take a look at our group quarters enumeration schedule. And did you pass out the handouts? Okay.
I was eating a cookie.
Where were you on that one, Kevin? Oh, you were eating a cookie. Okay, so this, Kevin here, one of our partnership specialists on the Oregon team, is passing out a good overview of a lot of this information, and then there's contact info on the back too for our area manager and then myself as well. So on March 30th, 2020, we will be enumerating shelters. March 31st, soup kitchens and regularly scheduled mobile food vans. April 1st is when we will be doing the TINSOLs, targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations. And then all of the other group quarters that I mentioned, hospitals, correctional facilities, hospice, all of those things. Very long operation. April 1st to June 5th is when we'll be doing that. That's the largest part of this whole operation because there's so many of those types of facilities or group quarters. So that's a little overview there. There are a couple different methods of enumeration at these locations, and alluded to this a little earlier as well. So let's see. In-person interviews will be conducted at shelters, soup kitchens, the mobile food vans, our TINSOLs, and then the group quarters during that big, long main operation that I mentioned. In-person interview is pretty much as simple as it sounds. It's basically Census Bureau enumerators doing in-person interviews with folks and using a paper form to fill out the form with them. That's the only method available for soup kitchens in terms of enumerating people experiencing homelessness. In-person interview is the only option at soup kitchens and regularly scheduled mobile food vans and the TINSOLs. They don't have any of these other options. It's just in-person interview, sort of similar to Point in Time, that is conducted. Shelters, however, will have an option to use what's called paper response data collection, and this essentially involves enumerators, aka census takers, aka census field staff, picking up a roster of residents and their associated demographic data from the administrator at the shelter or contact person, and then using that to submit to the National Processing Center. That's also an option available for all those other group quarters that I mentioned, hospitals, correctional facilities, all those types of things. And then we have a couple more down here, none of which are used in the service-based enumeration. So as you can see, not used with shelters, soup kitchens, food vans, TINSOLs. And these are a couple of different methods called e-response, drop-off pickup, and self-enumeration. E-response is essentially the internet response option for large group quarters facilities like a hospital, for example. So kind of similar to that, and that's where the administrators at that group quarter will be essentially uploading their information for the folks there to the e-response portal. Pickup drop-off pretty much sounds exactly how it is, which is just setting up time to drop off paper questionnaires, and the GQ administrator or point of contact will have them completed with the assistance of the folks there at a scheduled time for the enumerators to pick up. And then self-enumeration is interesting because it includes a representative from the group quarter, like an administrator, sworn in by a census field supervisor to conduct enumeration of respondents at the GQ. And that's something that was particularly helpful in, let's see, and I know some of the prisons and correctional facilities to help kind of not shake things up too much, as you can imagine. So, having looked over a couple of these enumeration methods, let's then look at how individuals are counted, particularly in the service-based enumeration here. So at regularly scheduled mobile food vans and soup kitchens, if folks there are receiving services at those locations during enumeration, if they have a usual home elsewhere, they should be counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time because they have a usual home elsewhere. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, then they are counted at the soup kitchen or food van location during that SBE enumeration. For shelters, they would be counted at the shelter, and then staff members who are there working at the shelter will be counted where they live and sleep most of the time. If that happens to be at the shelter, then they will be counted at the shelter. If not, then they are just counted at their usual home elsewhere where they live and sleep most of the time. For targeted non-shelter outdoor locations, TNSOLs, so they are counted where they are staying on census day. If people are temporarily displaced or experiencing homelessness but staying at a housing unit for a short period of time or an indefinite period, they should be counted where they live and sleep most of the time. If they cannot determine where that is, then they are counted where they are staying on census day. A couple of notes here on service-based enumeration, which again includes shelters, mobile food vans, soup kitchens, and targeted non-shelter outdoor locations. Field staff, our census enumerators, will be enumerating these locations and facilities in pairs. And I think it's a good place to insert this information here in that the folks who will be doing, this enumeration are not some sort of special agents or something from Washington, D.C. These are folks that will be are hired from the community. They are the folks who are living in the community, and it is our goal to hire as many community members to be working where they live in these operations, whether it's this one, whether it's address canvassing, which wrapped up a few months ago, whether it's the non-response follow-up, which we talked about earlier today. So something to keep in mind. And as I've been having some conversations with some of these organizations that work with people experiencing homelessness and provide services, we've been talking about encouraging their folks with point-in-time experience, the point-in-time volunteers, to apply to be census enumerators so that they can work in this very important and very large operation that, in terms of the TNSOL, well, in each one of these is just a day long, and we're going to be doing this across the entire United States. So something to keep in mind. As you can see, the SBE questionnaire is a little abbreviated. It includes name, date of birth, age on census day, sex, Hispanic origin, race, and if that person has a usual home elsewhere. It's my understanding that we will not be waking anybody up to ask for this information, and then, of course, there will be no strong-arming anybody to give this information. Partnership staff currently reaching out to point-in-time, continuum of care contacts across the state to build the workload list. That's me, actually. That's what I'm responsible for. So I'm reaching out to everybody across the state, or am about to begin that process to build our workload lists of where are all the shelters across the state, where are all the soup kitchens, where are regularly scheduled mobile food vans, what's a contact for each one of those, what's the contact information, and then once I build that list, I forward it down to the Los Angeles Regional Census Center, and the operation starts to kick off there, which I can talk a little bit about that in a minute here. But this list also includes the TNSOLs, the targeted and non-sheltered outdoor locations. If the point-in-time contacts, continuum of care contacts, these folks in the communities know where people are living outdoors and unhoused or unsheltered. They're included as well, as I have in that note there, people living in vehicles, parked along a city park or downtown or in outer East Portland, for example. If there's a particular street where folks are living in vehicles and we know that, we can take that information so that we could include that in our workload list for these service-based enumeration operations. And again, everybody is protected by Title 13 of the United States Code, which protects these, as hopefully you've heard many, many times today, protects all of this personally identifiable information on these forms that are submitted to the Census Bureau. So that is my overview. Like I said, I can go into a little bit of detail about the process or what's between me collecting this information and getting it down to LA and the actual start of service-based enumeration on March 30th, Happy to do that. Maybe I'll just go right into it. What happens is, we submit this information to Los Angeles, and then it essentially becomes, I'm on the partnership team, so I sort of step back from it a little bit, and it becomes mainly an in-office operation. So for the Portland Area Census Office, for example, which is in the Lloyd Center, there will be a staff there that will be reaching out to all the contacts on that on that list that I put together of the shelters and the service-based enumeration locations. They will reach out to those folks. They will collect information about their facility or their program, including an option of how to be enumerated, which I talked about a little bit there, and then set up an enumeration date and time, and that's called Group Quarters Advanced Contact. And that's going to be happening beginning in February, and it goes right to the beginning of March, and then a few weeks later is when we do the actual enumeration. So just a little bit of background on that. But let's take some questions, and if you want me to go back to any of the other slides, please let me know, and I'll click back. Yes, sir.
Kind of more technical and it's more interested in what the census data results. But so with the tinsel, how exactly are you identifying the address for those? And then I'm assuming it's either some kind of the raw data or a nearby intersection or something like that?
Yeah, essentially. I believe it's the closest cross street.
Okay. And then, so when you have the census geographies, the census blocks are very granular and you have lots of slivers and little bits and pieces of those things. In the past, if you go back to past censuses, we have a funny example is there's a traffic circle in Lads Edition that has 10 people in it.
Sure.
Full of roses, there's nobody there. So that's a mistake, right? That there's nobody there, and that they don't think they were using that as a way to hide, personal identifiable people.
Unless they counted in there.
There wouldn't have been anybody there.
On that night?
There wouldn't have been 10 people in that. There wouldn't have been 10 people there, period. It's not a habit. It's a little traffic circle, and it's a little rose garden, and there's no room to put anybody. So it's an error. And there's other error issues where you have little slivers along tracks where sometimes people get put there, and it's a mistake. Charles can confirm that.
Sure.
And now we're talking about a situation where you might actually have people, since we're counting them this way, they might actually literally show up. How are we going to be able to make those kinds of distinctions? And for most people's use of the census data, it's irrelevant. You're like, what is this nerd talking about? Who cares? It makes a difference when you're redistricting because you're actually apportioning those people into either here or there, and if so there always is kind of a need to be able to at least explain those errors to people when they're actually going in and trying to do this work. When it comes time to do redistricting, which is the primary point of the census.
Right.
So I'm not sure. Like I said, it's a very technical question. You may not have an answer, but I just didn't know if you've heard any information about how that's being addressed.
I have not, unfortunately.
Okay.
Although it sounds like, do you work with Charles?
Not anymore.
Sounds like there's a story there. Just kidding.
Long time ago.
Sure.
Moved on other things, but
That sounds like
I'm involved in some ways.
Right.
Redistricting,
So I can't address that. I'm not the technical aspect of that. I'm not totally sure, but it sounds like the kind of thing that we could get an answer to and learn more about by us communicating with Charles and sharing some of that information and just to learn more about how might address that sort of thing. Sorry, I can't speak to more about that though.
It's okay. I thought I'd get the
Sure.
out there at least. So.
Absolutely.
Just a quick thought on that. I'm wondering if the redistricting isn't done kind of behind the firewall with all of the complete information. It's not. It's done after the aggregation.
It's done by legislators and
so
public.
It's done.
That's who
so
does
all
it.
the data is done.
They're just doing it with the raw census. The data the census gives you, they make public.
Okay.
You have to take that and then, integrate it with whatever your software is you're using to generate those
You
districts.
broke my heart. And then I do have a question
Sure.
for you. So we spoke at the end of your first session, and when these contacts go out to the continuum of cares and to the folks that are in charge of the PIT counts, what's your sales pitch? Because the kickoff for this comes directly on the heels of the point in time counts for the state, which we do annually. We don't do it every 2 years. We do it every year. And that by itself is a really tough sell. We have to do it. It's a HUD requirement. We understand why we need to do it. But a lot of the people, well, virtually all of the people who are helping to conduct the PIT are volunteers. And they change from year to year. And they're definitely going to be a whole different group of people that were around during the last decennial. So when you reach out, your office is going to end up in touch with me. And I'm going to have to approach these groups that have just come on the heels of doing this really intensive point in time count that's really difficult, that has some kind of squishy value. How do I come to them and say, we need to do this again? We're going to be doing this now, and then in a couple of weeks I'm going to ask you to do it again. Can you just speak a little bit to how I can help you to help them understand why this is a separate but important activity that they need to support equally as they do?
Sure. Well, I think it's similar to how we speak to and work with other partners. The difference here is the timing issue that you're talking about. But the message that we continually touch on and send is how important this is for the community and in terms of federal funding and that impact. It's something that resonates quite a lot, and I don't know if that's part of the some of these service-based locations and facilities, if that's part of their understanding of or how that works in regards to point in time. But certainly it's important to the 2020 census, and it's important to everybody being represented in Oregon in particular. Let's just talk about Oregon. We're Oregonians. And sometimes that message might have to be tailored. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a hard sell, but I certainly hope not. And I hope that our enumerators and our office staff can help to alleviate some of those concerns. And with your help too, I think it's something that as I'm reaching out to point in time contacts or continuum of care folks, that's conversations that we'll probably all have to have too about how, what's the best way to message this and send it. And that's something that we face constantly as we're having these conversations and kind of pitching folks on this across the state.
I think it'll be really important to target exactly why they can't use the point in time counts that we have just done.
Right.
And I know that there's differences
Yeah.
and reasons, and the questionnaires are different, and the methodology has to be consistent across the United States.
Right.
Like, I get that. But when they say to me, why can't HUD just forward this along? Why do we have to do this again? If we could target specific funding streams, I'm aware of all the funding and all of that,
Sure.
but if we can say this particular funding stream is directly tied to decennial census and is separate and apart from your funding that you get from HUD, that's going to be a really strong
Yeah.
talking point.
Well, that certainly SNAP, $1 billion.
Sure.
The SNAP program in fiscal year 2016, Oregon got $1 billion, and that is, as you know, helped sort of allocated or distributed via decennial census data as kind of the baseline for that. So whether it's TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, even the Head Start program. There was somebody talking this morning about how important the Head Start program is to people experiencing homelessness. There are children experiencing homelessness in Head Start programs. So I think touching on some of those, I don't know if any of point in time data relates to any of those, but I know certainly decennial census data does. So I think talking about the importance of those programs to the folks that our community-based organizations and nonprofits are serving in regard to people experiencing homelessness will hopefully help to get them on board despite having to do a similar thing pretty recently.
One last
Sure.
question. I swear.
You can ask more.
People who are going to be doing these particular counts, are those paid positions then?
Yeah, absolutely. They're census enumerators. Yes.
Okay, mine might be a bit nitpicky, right?
Okay.
The street that you mentioned in Northeast Portland or East Portland with all the folks living in cars, right?
That was an example of
Okay.
something in a previous job where I was working out there. Yeah.
But are the enumerators going to certain streets and like bridges that you've identified?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of why I'm going to be reaching out to these contacts at point in time and continuum of care, because they can help tell me, where in Josephine County are people living outdoors, and that we need to ensure that we have them on our workload list so they can be enumerated at that time, or gathering in cars. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
I'm with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. We have office locations in Portland, Salem, Eugene, and Siletz.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some way those offices could be set up to, as data collection points of some sort or another?
For people experiencing homelessness? That's something that I'm trying to get an answer on, because I was asked a similar question recently, and I don't yet know what the answer is to that, and I'm having our folks in Los Angeles look into that more, because that's something that is on folks' mind as a kind of strategy to ensure folks are enumerated. I assume you're connected to Shayna,
Right.
which is good. Yeah, good. But that is something that I'm going to get the answer to, and then we can start figuring out if that's a strategy we can employ.
Wasn't Dancing Hearts doing some stuff like that?
I was just gonna say, there's the CAC funding through the
Yeah.
United Way, so you could potentially
I see.
apply for that. But if you want to connect after this, maybe we can talk a little bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing about that is that people experiencing houselessness or homelessness are they don't self-report on the census form, so they're not using the online version of the census. They would be, if they don't have a usual home, then they would be included in this operation. I guess they could. I won't say that. Never mind.
So individuals who receive vouchers to stay at a hotel for 2 weeks at a time and then go live in their car or go and live on the street in between receiving another voucher, if they're not in their car, they're not on the street on March, whatever the day is that everybody's marching out to collect everybody's data, but they're in a hotel, how are those people being accounted for?
Thank you for asking. We actually, all right, here's the big reveal. We've got another operation that covers this thing. It's called Enumeration at Transitory Locations. So that includes hotels, marinas, parks, parks in terms of like state parks and campgrounds and that sort of thing. So that is a separate operation that the timeline is a bit different from this, but it's the pieces are pretty similar. So yeah, absolutely that is important, because as you're saying, and that's the whole thing of the approach to all this is like figure out, okay, where are all these people going to be, and then what are the operations that are going to ensure that they are included. Yes?
Does that include prison populations or people that are incarcerated?
Yeah.
Who's going to be counting them?
Yep, that they're part of the group quarters enumeration. So, I guess they would be included in the enumeration that happens April 1st to June 5th. Yep. Vivian.
I'm going to put you on the spot for a bit. So, for my record,
Sure.
by reporting for the Pacific Sentinel, by including houseless populations and transient populations under group quarters enumeration, the census is, true or false, functionally erasing homelessness from federal level statistics.
Well, so my understanding is that information comes from HUD. Point in time.
I've got a follow-up about that.
Okay.
And the disparity. Okay, I'll just launch into it. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you're involved with the point-in-time count. Point-in-time is conducted in January, nationwide. over the course of one day.
10.
10 days? 10 days. Considering that the weather patterns involved will yield a lower rate of visible homelessness during January than fair weather visible homelessness during April, are we just functionally creating or deflating homeless statistics by having this disparity between organizations?
Mm-hmm. I actually can't really answer that because I don't know. I mean, if anybody else has a sort of opinion on that or some way to respond, I know because some of the folks here are sort of more involved in the data end of it, but are there any thoughts on that across the room?
The one thing I would say is that I don't think anyone, because the Census Bureau doesn't identify individuals as being homeless or unsheltered in the data products that come out. You're either part of the household population or part of the group quarters population, but group quarters include people who live in college dorms and prisons and all that. So it's all together. So when people want homeless count data, they go to the HUD data source. They wouldn't try to disentangle that from the census data because you have these anomalies in the data. Like, I know that there's an unsheltered location here in this park, and you look at the data and there's no one assigned to the park, but there are people living in a freeway. So like you can't try to untangle who's homeless in the way that the Census Bureau publishes the statistics.
As far as the weather question goes, I think the idea is to get people at the worst possible weather in the nation on average, because the highest percentage of people will be in emergency shelters and year-round shelters at that time. I get that there are problems with what I just said, but the idea is the weather is terrible. More people seek to be in shelters during those times, and it's easier to count people in shelters than it is to go out and try to find all of the unsheltered homeless in the community. So problematic, yeah, but I think that's the gist of it.
So I think to follow up, I think what we end up with is more of a total undercount of that population, but not as it relates to counting the population as a whole. You're more likely to miss people in the spring who are unsheltered, but we're not using the data to count homeless people, so it's not deflating the numbers because they would use the HUD data.
So by excluding unhoused as an option, as a residence option on the census forms, we are functionally deferring to the notedly problematic HUD data.
I would go with that.
Okay. Okay, we can talk more about
I don't
this
have
later.
happy answers for you.
There are no happy answers on this.
You can start lobbying for adding a category for the 2030 census.
Yes.
And by about that, I may have the resolution.
Now's the time to start.
No, I'm not kidding.
I know,
I'm
not either.
It's a good time if you want to change something. It won't change for 2020. But if this is I shouldn't say if this is an important policy issue. It's an important humanitarian issue. Start talking to your reps about seeing if that could get changed for 2030.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
You might start with the ACS.
Of course.
Yeah.
True, because the changes can happen in ACS sooner than they can happen in census, and it's not an easy change, but it's an easier change, I think, for ACS.
It's also problematic change in terms of outreach disparity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your thoughts and feedback on that one.
Came up in the earlier talk that was going on, and which was just about how to, it was very basic census stuff for people who didn't know much about it. But a lot of questions are coming up around this whole household question of multiple people living in the house, multiple families living in the house. And in that case, right, aside, so this when I'm talking about group quarter, we're talking about householder. What if you have, there is no householder, but if you have literally people squatting in a house, sort of make work, we always call them out, they're technically, as far as they're concerned, they're the residents. They may not be legally living there, but they're using it as a residence. They're probably not getting counted in this. the census probably wouldn't want to call it group quarters, but there is technically no householder per se, you know, they need to be a very collectively minded group of people. Is there a way to tease that out and make that work without either making people house suspicious, or, you know, is the Census Bureau liable if they're, you know, this is technically an illegal use of the property? I mean, how does that work legally?
Right.
And I only ask because right now I work for a school district, and if that comes up for us, where we're sort of checking addresses and verifying people, and we suddenly have multiple people show up at a single address, that raises two things. One, it could be faking because they want to go to a nice school, but in a lot of cases it's because it's a legitimate situation of a bunch of people living in a house. They are actually, to fall under more of the HUD category, where they're qualified. Did you realize that because you're living as a second family in this house, you're qualified for this, that, and the other because you're technically homeless?
Right.
From the definition. So you know, the census isn't obviously set up to deal with that, but I'm just wondering in terms of this group quarters and
Right.
integration, how that's.
Yeah, so you're right. The census sort of isn't set up to kind of tease some of those things out, but in terms of that example, if there was a house that was people were living in it, say they were squatting or living there but not paying rent or something, that house has an address, 123.5 Main Street or something, the census form would go there. And if those folks are living there, they could respond to the census form, or the method for sort of capturing that information from those folks, well, it would be the census form, and then if that doesn't happen, then it would be an enumerator going to knock on the door. And because of Title 13, their information is protected, so there's no way that we could share that with anybody. So there would not be any way that like law enforcement or anybody could access that and use that information against them. Looks like we have about 1 minute left. Okay, if there's no more questions, let's kind of wrap this up. Thank you for your time. And then if anybody wants to chat following, we're here. Thanks, everybody.